All right, welcome everyone. This is Corey Strothman again with Grace in Your Corner, and we are continuing on with Mental Health Awareness Month. Today, going to focus in on substance abuse disorders and addiction, and I am happy to be joined here by Cody Beaton from Prairie View. Cody, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Corey.
So I'm going to let Cody jump into his background and everything in that area in just a second, but I want to put a full disclaimer out there that one reason that I went to Cody is because I have had the honor to work with him as myself personally when I was experiencing this, and I was in rehab over a year ago now. I spent 2 weeks in Cody's facility, and Cody did a lot for me. I'm where I'm at right now and continuing to improve because of the things that him and his team did. So, Cody, I'm really proud to be here speaking to you on this side of things. But I know the power of what you do, and I'm wanting to give you that platform to let others know that things can get better. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and appreciate you saying that. That's one of the coolest things about our work is being able to see people who move through this and are doing well, and then ultimately give back, to those who are still struggling. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to reconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will interject some of my experiences when we have this dialogue throughout for everyone to hear. But I wasn't just for everyone watching this and listening, whether you're a spouse, a child, the person that might be struggling. I was there, and I know how difficult it is to take that step. These are a lot of scary terms that we use, but my goal is to break those down and let you know it's not that scary. The help is there, and the other side is so much brighter. So let's go ahead and get into this today. Um, Cody, why don't you start off by just explaining to us a little bit of your background, experience that you have with addiction, and what you're currently doing.
So I'm a clinical social worker as well as a clinical addictions counselor. I've been employed with Prairie View, which is in central Kansas, basically. I worked most of my career with Prairie View from 2012 till November of 2019 in Newton, Kansas. And the majority of that was spent on our addictions treatment center, which was an inpatient drug and alcohol rehab, basically. Unfortunately, the treatment center closed down in November of 2019, just something that we couldn't sustain. But I've been in our Wichita East office now, which is one of our outpatient clinics. We have 5 total locations: Wichita, McPherson, Hillsboro, and then 2 in Wichita. And I'm in our Wichita East. And I know all those towns mean nothing to those in, New Jersey, New York, or wherever you're watching from. But central Kansas. So I've been in this new office, outpatient office, for about 5 months now. But it's been a unique journey because about half of that has been at home, right? Due to COVID-19, I've been working from home and seeing people just like this actually through Zoom. So it's been an interesting experience, and we can certainly talk more about that. But I'm still not only getting used to that, but also the outpatient world. Outpatient is quite a bit different from inpatient treatment, different levels of motivation, different stages in life where people are coming in. So still adjusting to that. And I think both sides of the work. I think both are very rewarding and helpful, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a great point. So talk to me a little bit, because I want to discuss this. You've been on the inpatient side, you've seen the outpatient. For those that are just starting to get into this, thinking maybe they might need support, what are the different levels of support there, and what do those look like at each level?
Yeah. So a lot of the work that I do is just strictly outpatient, right? So you can see a therapist, come into the office or Zoom, whatever it may be at that point in time, or, an hour once a week. And that's typically what it looks like. It could be every other week. It could even be once a month. And typically we're looking at about a 90-day period, seeing how things are going, monitoring progress, and then updating and deciding whether this is something that you still want to pursue or, is still necessary for you. And that can always change. The therapeutic relationship can always change. And a lot of that changes up to you as the patient, on how often we're seeing each other and what we're working on. At the outpatient level, there are a few other things that you can do too. And we actually have that at this office that I'm at. First would be outpatient level 1, which involves group therapy, and that's typically twice per week for about an hour and a half a piece, so 3 hours total per week. So a little more intensive, a little more involvement, but also, you know, you still live at home, you still get to work and do all those things. You just come in for a couple hours a week. The next level, which is really about the highest level of outpatient care, is called intensive outpatient, often referred to as IOP. And we do that here as well. That's typically 3 times per week for 3 hours apiece. So 9 hours total. So pretty big commitment. And that would be for those who are really looking to get a, you know, a hold on their situation, whether it's substance use or mental health. But I don't quite have the ability to check into an inpatient treatment center for, you know, several weeks or even 30 days. So it allows you that freedom to still be home, still take care of things that you need to take care of, kids, job, whatever it may be, but still get some pretty intensive care. And then beyond that, then we go into basically the inpatient world. So, you know, where you go there and you stay there. And for substance use, often inpatient is going to be at least a couple of weeks. Some of it's dictated by your insurance. So unfortunately, it can be a little out of our control. The hope is that we could have people in treatment for at least 30 days. If we went by the research of how people prosper the best in treatment, we would put people in treatment for 90 days or more, because 90 days is the most vulnerable part of your recovery. So if we could have that intensive care where you have people around you at all times providing support for the first 90 days, man, that would be amazing. But unfortunately, we just don't have the system that's set up to fund that, right? Insurance
Right.
won't pay for that long, and it's expensive as heck. So just being able to do that is tough, and that's why the aftercare is so important. After you leave an inpatient treatment center, following up with those various levels of outpatient care that I talked about. So that, I think that pretty much sums up kind of a layman's term for the continuum of care and different services that can be accessed.
Sure. So I am new to this and I'm like, well, I know that there's these levels, there's inpatient, level 1 outpatient. Where in the world do I fall? How do they know where to start?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And sometimes that could be part of the hesitancy to even make that call, right? Is I don't know what to do or where to go or what I can afford. For an organization like ours, it should be as simple as just making that first call, right? Calling our admissions department. I need to talk to someone about my substance use. Our scheduling staff, as well as clinicians, are typically able to set up a first appointment. And a lot of times, if you haven't had any services before, you want to take a look at the outpatient level first.
Mm-hmm.
And often making an attempt at outpatient gives you a better case for inpatient, you know, insurance wise. So typically that would begin with an assessment. So you'd meet with someone like myself, a licensed clinician, to go over what's been going on with you, how it's affecting your life, the various symptoms, you know, the mental health that's involved, and then we can make a decision together on what level best suits you. So really, you know, we're looking to be your guide in that, you know, because we are in the industry, you know, we know what it looks like when someone probably would do better in inpatient versus outpatient, and we just want to help you in that process.
Yeah. So this is a question I had for you at the end, but I think it fits in well here.
Okay.
Say that I am a loved one of someone that's struggling, that we really feel that needs that. Can I make them go to rehab? Can I check them in myself?
Mhm. Most of the time, no. And the thing about it is with addiction and with mental health too, the person who is struggling really has to be the one to make that decision, to make that turn. Otherwise, it's a tough thing for it to stick. If we try to get sober or clean or just well in general for other people, that's not always sustainable. You know, when we really make that life altering change, it's because we know that we have to do it for ourselves. And you know, I was blessed to work with a lot of people, you know, like Corey, who came into treatment ready to go to work, right? I need to make a change. I need to do something. And then you put in that hard work and you can see, you know, the benefits that are reaped from it, just in your own story, Corey. And so, no, I don't think you can force them. You can certainly help in the process. And that's kind of a tough line to walk too, because a lot of times when people are struggling with mental health and substance use, it's a touchy subject, right? They know deep down that something's going on, but that's a really tough thing to admit because there's a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of shame, guilt, you know, in that space. And so being able to come to that point where I'm ready to ask for some help or accept some help is a very tough thing. So as family, I think it's just important to support as best you can. You know, if you want to share with a loved one that you're noticing something's going on and you're worried about them, just lead with that love, lead with concern. rather than judgment
Yeah.
or shaming, because that tends to put us on the defensive. So just let them know that I'm noticing something's different. You're not you. Can we talk about maybe some options that could be helpful for you to get back to
What if
you?
it's your child and they're under 18 years old?
Yeah. So in substance use, it's a little tougher, to get minors treatment, unfortunately. For instance,
Hmm.
our treatment center out in Newton was just adult. A lot of the times for anyone under 18, it's more of a psychiatric placement versus a specific substance use, which I
Okay.
think, kind of speaks to the issue that we have in our country, that we're not as proactive as we should be. I wish that we could be out there and be ahead of it, working on mental health, working on substance use, figuring out why kids turn to chemicals in the first place, rather than, we catch them when they're in adulthood and they've been using for years and years and years. So yeah, if your kid is struggling, certainly there's help out there. There's outpatient services. I see kids, I see 6 and up basically. But as for inpatient, that's kind of a tough go. And
Yeah.
like I said, that relates to, we're just not really proactive in that field yet. I think we're working towards it. But yeah, certainly outpatient services are there. There are support groups. I kind of failed to mention earlier, AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, Smart Recovery. These are all peer support groups that are free. And
Hmm.
these are things you can join, without having to pay or get into the treatment system at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. And so I know and we're going to revisit the question at the end about loved one and finding support and how can we manage that difficult situation. But I did want to kind of take a second here and just explain to everyone out there that, as Cody had said, my story does have some positive moments in it, and I continue to grow on that. But I don't want you to forget about the struggles that I had at the beginning. I was that person that was adamant that I didn't need to seek that support, that I did not want to go into a rehab because of the stigma and that, and just me being in denial. So don't feel like it's something that won't ever come. Unfortunately for me, it took a life-changing scenario of me receiving a DUI to really surrender to that. But it isn't something that is forever out of the question. But it is hard for people to get there and really admit that, and sometimes it takes some intervention with that. So, and I also want to say that I have gone through all of these things. I was in inpatient for over 2 weeks. As he had said, the intensive outpatient, 9 hours a week, I was doing that. Then I reduced back to just the outpatient of, once a week. And now I continue with support groups myself. But I want people to know that it wasn't going to work for me at first because I wanted to continue the quick, fast pace of life and not lose out in work life, home life, and all that. And I finally had to hit pause on everything and focus in on me. And that's the thing I remember with you, Cody, is, you know, why rehab was so good for me is because I was just isolated from everything. And I had 2 weeks to be away from all distractions and focus in on myself personally and what I could do. And I read more books at Prairie View than probably I've read since I've left Prairie View. But
Yep.
it just focusing on myself and taking the time. And then when you get to that outpatient, and 9 hours a week is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
if you think you're going to juggle it and only get 50% towards that, you're not going to get what you need. So it's important to just truly focus inward and do that. And I'm more than willing to talk with anyone one-on-one about that. But I've gone through that continuum, and it really does work if you can dedicate what you need to do that.
Right. Right.
So let's talk a little bit about, because this is something that's so hard, is it's not just the person that's struggling that this impacts, this disease. And the toll that it took on my direct family, my parents, my in-laws, it's something that you can't understate. How do you suggest that you deal with that as a parent, as a spouse, as a sibling? Because to see someone's life slowly unraveling, it hurts and it does a lot of damage. What should they do?
Yeah. So a lot of different things that we could discuss with that. I think one of the things that I always come back to is what's called the 3 C's, and the 3 C's comes from Al-Anon. Al-Anon, is derivative from non-alcoholics, and that's the support group that is kind of catty corner to AA, right? It's for those who are having a loved one who is struggling with an addiction. And what a group like Al-Anon provides is that support and that empathy, because the person who sees their loved one going through this has their own battle. It could be said that they have the addiction to the addict. They're worrying about their well-being and whether they're going to be alive or how they're going to function, and their whole life begins to revolve around that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have their own recovery to go through. And the 3 C's is something that's paramount in the Al-Anon program. And the 3 C's are: the family didn't cause the addiction, the family cannot control the addiction, and the family cannot cure the addiction. So it's not your fault, that your loved one's going through this. It's really not their fault, right? It's a complicated biopsychosocial disease. And we'll talk about that more, I'm sure. So it's really no one's fault, right? Who knew when that person picked up that first drug or alcohol that it would transgress to this, that it would eventually become this situation? None of us knew. Next C would be control. So I always say you can take away their car keys and their credit card, and you could lock them in the basement. And regardless of what you do, if they want to drink or use, they're still going to find a way to do that. That's not something that's within your power, someone else's behavior. And then lastly, there's no cure, right? There's no cure to addiction. The cure is working a good recovery program, changing your life, similar to what Corey's done. What he does today is probably a complete 180 from what he did before, in a lot of aspects in life. And so it's not your responsibility as a family member to do any of those, right? Not to take the blame for why this is here, not to control the process, and certainly not to be the cure or the fixer. And so what that does is kind of allows us to pull a little bit of that off our shoulders, right? It's not your weight to bear. You can help and you can support and you can be there for them, but ultimately it's not your decision to make this change. Your loved one has to do that. So just always remembering that it's not on me, but at the same time, I can be a really big support for them, knowing that this is a disease, not unlike cancer or diabetes. If my loved one had cancer, I wouldn't be upset with them. I wouldn't be mad at them or disappointed in them or shame them or any of those things. But we do that with addiction, because it's a little different. It's not fit in the disease box that we're used to, but it meets all the same criteria. So being able to take that attitude of love and support. If my loved one has cancer, I'm there for them, right? And I love the heck out of them, and I do everything I can to show them that support. And so if I can do the same thing in the battle with the disease of addiction, then I'm really helping, the best way that I can.
Yeah. I use the 3 C's all the time when I talk to people. I think those are a great foundation to start with. And one thing that my family experienced with Cody leading was a family group. And I thought that was powerful because the same as we talked with Johnson County Mental Health in our last video is people just don't know enough. We need to educate people more. And I think that you did a great job of educating people about that. So talk to us about just some of the key foundational pieces of education around addiction that you think people should walk away from with this video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you, by the way. So addiction's a disease, right? And that's the big thing. And that's what I was kind of talking about with treating it like a disease completely changes the way we go about it. If we treat it as a choice or a character defect or, just bad decision making, then we're going to see it a lot differently. But, addiction is a disease, and it's been defined as a disease since 1955. So it's not like it's a new novel concept. But, generally, with the public, we're behind on that. And it's just like Corey said, we need education, right? And it's kind of human nature that if something doesn't affect us directly, that we don't really research into it too deeply. And so a lot of the times we're kind of caught off guard when someone in our family, falls prey to addiction, and it's like, what the heck is this, right? And at that point, do we dig into it and do some research when we found out, oh, there's a lot more to this than just this person wants to drink or use. And so, the big, I guess, counter argument to addiction being a disease is that there's an element of choice involved in it, right? I mean, you have to physically pick up the bottle or, the joint or whatever it may be. There's an element of choice, unlike in cancer or diabetes. There's not as much choice in those types of things. And so it's easy to see those as a disease. But the thing about addiction is it's not a disease or a choice, it's a disease of choice.
Right.
It changes the very ability to make decisions like you normally would. Your brain gets hijacked, specifically your pleasure system. And, you know, one big thing that I think helped family in those family groups was talking about this concept of anhedonia.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
I actually, one of my first blogs that I wrote in Grace in Your Corner, I've got the graph that you did and all that stuff, Anhedonia, that labels it very well. But explain to us what that is.
Yeah. So anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. And pretty much every person who falls into serious addiction gets to this point. And so, you know, more or less your dopamine system gets thrown all out of whack. And all those things that you used to find enjoyable, because your brain has been flooded with the dopamine by artificial substances, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or opiates, whatever it may be, you know, that's very salient to the brain. When the dopamine comes in from that substance, the brain says, whoa, what's this? You know, I need more of that. And so eventually your brain basically develops a tolerance, you know, to where I need this higher level of dopamine in order to actually feel pleasure. So all those normal everyday things like, you know, watching KU basketball, you know, one of the best things you can do.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a whole lot of dopamine that comes from that, but go ahead, continue.
Watching basketball, going to movies, spending time with family and friends, all these things that we normally like to do that become hobbies, those things no longer produce pleasure. And so naturally I stopped doing those things. And the only thing that hits that pleasure threshold now is that substance. And so
Yeah.
what else am I going to do besides that substance? And it more or less becomes a survival instinct for people. So it's not that I'm choosing drugs and alcohol over my family, my friends, and all the things that I love. It's just my brain, you know, doesn't recognize that anymore, right? Drugs and alcohol become survival, the same as thirst or, you know, hunger or, you know, breathing, all these unconscious things that we do. Drugs and alcohol fall into that same line when you get into addiction. And so, like I said before, it's not a disease or a choice, but a disease of choice.
Yeah. And I think that that's what sparks a lot of frustration is people, you always hear family members or people say they just need to stop. They need to stop doing that. And they become frustrated because they think that it's just as easy as stopping, where really the person behind them, they would stop if they could. They would love nothing more than to stop. And they just don't understand the science that goes beyond that. And I know that it was eye-opening for my parents and my family when they started to watch some of these films that you had shared with me, and they learned more about it. And we've had conversations that if we could go back in time, we could probably prevent some of the hurt that we caused each other by the way we approached it, by a parent wanting to control it, by me not being able to express or understand what's going on. And you know, the anhedonia and all of that, I lived that. Alcohol started for me because I was depressed and I wanted to go home and escape from a day, and it would be my hour or two of normalcy. But it eventually got to the point that at night I needed that. I was trying to chase that normalcy that I couldn't get anymore, and I just couldn't find it anymore. And that was life, and I wanted nothing more than to stop. But you know, it's just, I'm telling myself, well, I know that this is the way that I can feel normal for an hour or two. And it's just a cycle that is brutal to get through. So it is, I can say I've lived that too. And there's a lot of truth to what you're saying.
Yeah. And so to tack onto that, you know, you imagine the family feeling this way, that it's a decision that, you know, just stop. Now imagine the person who's actually going through it thinking that same way, right? Because they haven't been educated on it. You know, we don't just look up what does addiction look like until we start to wonder, well, is this me?
Mm-hmm.
And so having those thoughts of, well, why don't I just stop? Why can't I just quit? You know, it's just a decision. Shame, shame, shame. You know, and that just builds up, which makes it even harder to come to that decision, to talk about it, to make the decision to quit. So, I mean, you can see how that just multiplies and multiplies, and you have this cycle that you get stuck in before you even try to get help. You know, it might keep you from getting help. So it's a tough process, and I think that's why it's so important that we do, you know, interviews like this and what you do in general with Grace in Your Corner, like just getting the word out that this is more than just a choice or a decision, and we don't have to succumb to that stigma that keeps us from getting help.
Yeah. And, you know, my advice on the stigma for people out there watching this, is I do more individual interactions because it's so difficult. Start small. I mean, you don't have to start and announce to an extended family that you're struggling with depression or addiction or something like that. Start with someone you trust the most, and or maybe a professional, and start there. But start that conversation, because if you feel like there might be an issue, explore into it. Pick up the phone, call. Um, there's so many better options for you out there. I can't stress enough that we can't let the dad, because it felt like like I was wearing the A on my chest for addiction. And
Yep.
it's scary to tell people that because of what they're going to think, and then the shame. And I wake up the following morning with shame because I had a drink, and then the only way I can get past that shame is to have a drink after work the next night. And
Right.
it's a downward spiral. I mean, it
Right.
definitely is.
Yeah, which describes that shame cycle to a T. Drinking because I'm ashamed, and then ashamed because I drink or because I use. And that's a tough thing to get out of. And, the hope is that we realize that we're not alone, because a lot of times that's what keeps us down too, is thinking I'm the only one with this problem. I'm the only one struggling in this way. When in reality, there are a lot of people out there who are having that, not exact same battle, but a very similar battle. And I think probably you can attest to it, Corey. You get into the world of recovery and you're like, wow, these people are my people, right? They've been through the
Yep.
same things. They've had the same struggles. And you finally get that sense of empathy, right? That empathy from meeting with others who have been through it that you really can't get from anywhere else. And sometimes you can't get that from your family because they haven't been through it, right? Just as they don't understand your struggle and what you're going through, it goes the other way too. They can't quite understand what's going on with you from their side of things because they haven't been through it. So finding that true empathy, I mean, empathy is the antidote to shame, being
Yep.
able to know that I'm not alone in this. And so that's why getting help, getting into treatment, being in the peer support groups, whether it's AA or Celebrate Recovery or whatever it might be, just getting around others who are going through similar things is huge in recovery.
Yep. And I would agree with that. It felt like when I finally checked in to Prairie View that a burden was lifted off of my shoulders because all the outside pressures were gone, and I was connecting with people that felt the same way I did. And they had the same judgment on them. And it's nice to actually get down to it and know that you're not alone. There's other people that go through this. Um, the power of connection when you're dealing with addiction cannot be overstated.
Right.
The connections, and I tell people this a lot as I reflected back on a year of Grace in Your Corner. This site has helped me just as much, if not more, than anyone that I've helped because of all the connections that I'm making. I'm continuing to build connections, and it's good for my soul. I mean, it's good to keep me on track, but finding those connections that work for you is powerful. So I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are even some theories out there that the opposite of addiction isn't necessarily sobriety, but connection, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when I get deep into my addiction, I lose all those connections to my work life, my family, my friends, my hobbies, my interests, that anhedonia. I just lose all those connections. And so what do I have left? This one coping skill that eventually becomes, the death of me more or less, that slowly kills me. But that's the only thing I can turn to. And so in recovery, the more connections I build, the less I need that stuff, right? I realized that it was really just toxic for me.
Yep.
And so you're right, those connections are huge.
And I have the TED Talk. It was at Johanna. It's someone that has the
Mhm.
opposite of addiction is connection, or everything you know about addiction is wrong. That's very powerful. It's linked on my site too.
Yeah.
I'd encourage people to take a look at. But so we talked a little bit about some data, but give us the eye-opening data that okay, now we've experienced and we realized that we needed support, but it is not an easy journey. Give us some of the statistics on what the process going through, that there's more likely to be a bump or two in the road. You have that data still on the top of your head?
Oh man. No.
Any of it?
There is what we call the rule of the third, and this is probably the most accurate, I'd say, representation of how people do in recovery. It's tough to track, right? Especially, when we had our treatment center, we'd call people, 7 days after they left, 30 days after they left, 90 days after they left. That's not as simple as it seems, right? Because
Yeah.
people get new numbers or they move on or, they move to the other side of the country, or, whatever it may be. Things happen, and it's not always bad that you don't answer. It may be that you're doing really well. And so sometimes it's tough to track those outcomes. But the rule of the third, comes from Terrence Gorski, which is one of the forefathers in addiction, basically does a lot of relapse prevention work. Most of what we do cognitive behaviorally now in the field kind of stems back to Terrence Gorski and people that he followed. And so Terrence Gorski said the rule of the third. So a third of people going into recovery are going to do really well. They're going to get some help, and they're going to go and have long-lasting sobriety. Whether they have a bump in the road or not, eventually they get to a point where they're doing really well, and they've moved past this point in their life. Another third of people are going to eventually, try to get some help, go into sobriety, have some struggles, maybe do some more treatment, maybe return and do another tour in treatment. But eventually they'll get to long-lasting sobriety as well. And then you have the last third of people who either will be in and out of treatment, for most of their life, and who will have struggles, or never found the treatment system at all, and their addiction eventually kills them, or puts them in prison, something of that nature. So it's grim in some sort, right? That, a third of people don't necessarily make it, that their addiction, takes them down pretty much. But also 2/3 of people make it, right? Yeah. 2/3 of 66+% of people with some help are able to get into this life of recovery and do really well, and have a long, happy life. And, what separates that typically is the ability to reach out and get some help, because it's a really tough thing to do alone. And also remembering that it's okay to have slip-ups, right? We're humans. We're meant to make mistakes. If we didn't make mistakes, we'd be perfect. We'd be gods. But we're human, so we make mistakes. And so knowing that even if we get some sobriety under our belt and then we have a lapse or a relapse, that can't be the end of the world. Because if I see it as the end of the world, it's just going to drag me back down to where I was. So it's not excusable or acceptable, but at the same time, I've got to give myself a little bit of the break, knowing that sometimes we fall, but in the end, it makes us stronger, honestly, when we have struggles and we work through it and we learn from it.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. And I think that's another thing, just the education piece, is letting people know, okay, so addiction does not have to or need to or even define somebody. Yes, I'm a person in recovery, but that does not mean that I can't go out and crush my goals and prove to people day in and day out in the workforce, or as a parent or as a son, that I'm as good as anyone else that has not had that. And I feel like that's another part that the stigma brings down, is people are afraid to say that because they feel like they're getting a lifelong label. But that's not the case. And I want people to know that some of the most courageous people that I know are the ones that share their stories, and they're not afraid of it, and they're being at the forefront of helping break down that stigma. And again, that's kind of what I'm wanting to do too, is I'm wanting you to know that when I say you, the Grace in Your Corner community, people out there, that you're not alone, and that it doesn't have to define you. And it's something that might be a chink in your armor, but we own it. We get past it. Just like you said, any other medical condition. We don't look at someone with diabetes and say, they're diabetic, so I'm guessing that they're probably not a very good employee. Are you serious? I mean, it's just the mindset we have to get past.
Right. Yeah. And I think we would be surprised at how many well-known, successful people are actually in recovery, who have had struggles. Even just thinking about, like the celebrity community, someone like Morgan Freeman has been sober for, I think, 40 plus years. We don't even know about it because he's been sober for so long.
Yep.
Have someone like Eminem, the rapper, Marshall Mathers. He's been clean and sober for like 11 years now.
Yep.
Bradley Cooper, 5+ years. Ben Affleck. I mean, these are all people who went through these struggles in the public eye, and they have their own different side of things just because of the publicity of it. When they fall, everyone knows it, and you can relate to that, Corey, being in a situation where yours was known.
Sure.
And that adds a whole other element of shame to it. And so just knowing that, we can prevail and we can still do really cool things. Those are, all those people I mentioned are probably guys that we look up to, or girls that we look up to. And just never knowing other people's struggles. I'm sure you've seen it. You go to a meeting and you just see so many different types of people, and you would have no idea that they were in recovery, until this point. Just knowing that we all have our own battles, and eventually we become stronger because of them.
Yeah, and through through the speaking presentations, engagements that I've done, writing, I've had more people that I've known and respected that have came to me and said that they're in recovery or they're dealing with mental health that I had no idea about. Um, it didn't change my opinion on them at all. I mean, I looked up to these people I would have never known, and it's just amazing,
Yeah.
the power of people and connection. So
Mhm.
I want to respect your time, so I want to get through a few more things here, and I
Okay.
want to just talk to you about some of the most frequently asked questions that are difficult questions that come to me. And I don't have a perfect answer, and I express all the time that I just give my own experiences. I don't have a degree or anything of that sort. But the first thing is, just what are some signs that a loved one might be struggling with addiction? What a red flag that might go up?
Yeah, so I think what we talked about earlier, the anhedonia can peek its head out a little bit, and that's a red flag. All those things that the person used to love to do and normally would do, if those start to drop off, something's different. And so like for me, I love to play basketball. That's one of my passions. So it's been really tough during COVID-19 to not be able to play at all or
Mm-hmm.
watch.
Mm-hmm.
That's been tough for me. But if circumstances were regular and I just stopped playing basketball, that's a red flag. Or if my wife and I stop going to movies, because that's something that we do a lot, that's also been taken away from us during this time.
Right.
And so if I stop doing those regular activities, that's a red flag. Isolation, right? Pulling away from people, which could be a product of that shame. That shame that I'm in. I just don't want others to see me because I don't feel too good about myself at this point. Just irregular behavior in general. As a loved one, you kind of know what to expect a lot of the times from this person. And if you have that gut feeling that something's off, that could certainly be a sign. And the most important thing is just keeping that open and honest communication with your loved ones. I
Mm-hmm.
always talk about with family not falling into the scoreboard effect. And scoreboard effect is that me versus you, right? So I'm on this side of the scoreboard and you're on this side and we're just battling and you did this to me and but you did that before, and you always have something to come back with and bring up the past for. But with family and marriages and whatever it may be, close relationships, we want to be on the same team, right? We're on that same side of the scoreboard. We're helping each other out. The opponent is, unhappiness or addiction or whatever it may be. We're fighting against something, but we're on the same team. And so always remembering that we can be on that same side and help each other, keep that open communication. So then we know when something's off, right?
Yeah.
Because we know what to expect from our teammate. And when you're on the same team, you're able to have accountability and call each other out respectfully and share things that I'm noticing and hopefully not put the person on the defensive because we remember that we're working together, not against each other.
Yeah. And that's
So
one thing that
yeah.
I established, is because I was very defensive when I was depressed and using alcohol to escape, that any question that came to me, I would snap back at them. So with your help and family support and just transparent conversation, we came up with a plan that was accountable, that I said, okay, these are the things I need from you. If you approach them in this way, I won't be
Yeah.
as defensive. And we established barriers, essentially, that were crucial. But we all said, okay, we've developed this plan. We've worked on it together. We know that this is the way to approach it, and we respected that and stayed within those barriers, even if we thought that it would be better a different way.
Mhm.
So it's hard, especially at the beginning,
Mhm.
but it's important to have that open conversation. And again, it might be that you start just with your spouse or your parent, and not have too many people in that conversation. But yeah, that is, it's so true to have that transparent conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point. Your recovery is your business, right? You choose who to disclose that to. And at
Yeah,
some point, the hope is that you're confident enough in yourself and in your recovery that it's an open book, right? And by doing that, like what you do with your work is you empower others, right? You allow others to see that there's others out there like me and they got through this, so why can't I?
yep,
And that's kind of the beauty of it, and that's a big part of recovery, is being able to give back what you've gained. And
yeah.
by giving back, you keep it. You stay sober because you're helping others stay sober.
Yeah, and I my quote that I put out on social media yesterday was actually the imperfections can create the most inspirations, and that's just by displaying that, hey, I'm not perfect. Um, People see that and say they're managing life and they're successful, even though they might have these challenges, and it creates hope, and hope is powerful.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
let's go to this is the one that is it really is hard because I don't have a perfect answer, and I understand the tension that it causes on a family. But you have a spouse that or a parent that has a problem. It's obvious. It's starting to destruct your life, whether it's through kids, your marriage, um, your connection with your parents. But they're in denial. They refuse help. It feels like you're watching them slowly die. Like, where do I draw the line? How do I approach that situation? What is too much? What do I do that might not be, that might be helping them? What might be hurting them? Where do I start? What do I do?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely different for everyone. And, enabling is a thin line, right?
Yeah.
Helping someone's addiction to progress, whether it's on purpose or not, usually comes from a good place with family, right? I want to help them. I want to be there for them. And so because of that, sometimes we can become desperate and actually do things that further the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
But also remembering that it's still that person's, decision to keep it going or to make some changes. So I mean, the best thing that we can do, and also realizing that it's to some extent out of our control, is have an intervention of some sort. But we're not talking like the old school MTV intervention, right? It's not get everyone in this person's life in a room and put them in the middle and tell them all the things they're doing wrong.
Right.
Because that's not really proven to be effective, right? That puts us on the defensive. It makes us feel cornered. And
Yeah.
so really anymore, it's more about having just one or a few trusted people, right? Who does this person trust? Who do they respect? And maybe we'll at least give a thought of listening to and talk to them about it, right? And like I said earlier, just leading with love and concern can do a world of difference. Language is huge, right? Pointing the finger and saying, you're doing this, you're doing that, gets us like this immediately. But sitting down and saying, hey, I'm really concerned for you. I've seen some things that make us worried, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we love you and we don't want you to be in trouble. We don't want you to die. And when we see what you're doing, using or drinking, it makes us think you're gonna die, and that really scares us. That's a
So
lot different than you.
right, and so you have that conversation because I've had people discuss this with me. They've had these conversations originally. There's no change in behavior from that person you've talked to. They question like, so I'm starting to do things without them. I feel shameful about it, but like, is it okay to kind of limit their impact in my life right now? Is that giving up on them? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think you still want to try to remember the whole disease concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if this person had cancer? How would I treat the situation? Would it be differently? So that first and foremost. But at the same time, I got to take care of myself, right? I'm still a person that deserves love and care and happiness. So it's not selfish to make yourself a priority.
Yeah.
And so remembering that, yeah, you have that right too to step away from the situation. And whether that makes them better or worse, what they're drinking or using, that's not your responsibility, right? It's not your responsibility to keep them well or keep them sober. They've got to do that, and that's a tough pill to swallow because you're family and you love them, more than anything. But ultimately, they've got to come to that decision. And unfortunately, sometimes that comes with a rock bottom, right? A situation where I was thinking I could handle this and, whatever, screw my family, I'm going to do what I want to do. And then something happens, and then that realization comes that, wow, I really do need some help. And it's tough to see your loved one go through that, but sometimes that's what it takes, just
Yep.
ultimately remembering it's going to be their choice to get well. And when it's their choice, not forced upon them, that's when it's really going to happen. That's when it's going to stick.
Yep. And I clearly recall, and I don't even know if I shared this with the community, that I wrote my family a letter November before my DUI in January that I was at rock bottom, and that I was going to get myself out. But what's your favorite saying about rock bottom? You remember it?
Oh man, do you remember it?
Until you put the, you're not, you haven't reach rock bottom until you put the shovel away. I think you said
Yeah.
that numerous
Rock
times.
bottom when you stop digging.
When you stop digging, yeah. And the reality was I thought I was at rock bottom, but I continued to dig. And it's so important to realize that, things can get worse, and you have to have the ability to realize that, recognize that, and move forward. But
Yeah, and there was this thing that one of our old counselors said. He would say, well, you haven't done this yet, right? A lot of people say, well, I haven't gotten a DUI yet, or I haven't lost my family yet, haven't gotten arrested yet. And this counselor, he would say, yet is an acronym for you're eligible to.
yeah,
So even though you haven't done that yet, you keep drinking and using, you're making yourself eligible to fall into that. At some point, it might be there.
yeah, absolutely. That's great. I like that. So a couple more things. We talked a little bit about COVID-19. What impacts have you seen with COVID-19 in this? Because I've been so concerned about people that have put in so much work, and then you feel like you kind of are isolated in your own house. And liquor stores are even going to the point where I've seen they're delivering. I mean, it's the access is there. Have you seen any impact because of COVID-19 and addiction?
Yeah, I mean it's really unprecedented. So it was tough to predict what was going to happen, and still kind of tough to keep a finger on the pulse of what is happening. But we do know that, right, liquor stores stayed open. They were deemed essential, for whatever reason. So that just shows how much alcohol in particular permeates our society, and like you said, all the delivery services, something that we haven't seen before. So certainly it's available, and that's why the job of the alcoholic in recovery is so difficult, right? Because it's there on every corner versus, maybe opiates or cocaine, not quite as prevalent, or at least out in the open as alcohol is. It's legal and it's pushed heavily. And so I think I've seen a little bit of both. Some people have certainly struggled because of the availability, the increase in downtime, plus the isolation. I mean, that's a tough mix to overcome, especially if you're new in recovery. And so some have struggled. I think some have actually done well, or have done better. I've heard from some people that anxiety has improved during this time because it limits some of the social interactions that are often the inducer of anxiety. There's also this feeling that, well, everyone is kind of in the same boat right now, right? In that constant state of, well, what's going to happen next? There's some unknown, not sure what to expect. The person with severe anxiety lives in that state all the time. So it's like, wow, this is my sandbox. This is where I'm usually hanging out. And so for everyone else to be in that boat presents a little bit of empathy that maybe the person with severe anxiety doesn't usually have.
That's so true.
And so I think some have actually, even though it sounds odd, they've done better during this time. As for therapy, I've been doing the Zoom televideo type stuff for a couple months now. And at first, I think people were pretty hesitant, but I think it's developed a bit of a groove now, to the point where some people just wouldn't do it, to where now my caseload has actually grown. More people are starting to reach out because it has become a new normal.
Yep.
It takes a little bit of that fear out, right? I can be in my own home and talk to this person rather than having to get out, drive there, suffer that anxiety of what's going to happen, who am I going to see, all that. So I think it's helped a little bit for some, but I think we're all anxious for there to be some normalcy again, where we can talk in person and really make those face-to-face connections like we're used to.
Yeah. Mass-to-mass connections.
Yeah.
You got it? There's not even a Jayhawk on that thing. I can't believe it.
No, I haven't got my custom one in the mail yet. I'm waiting for you to send it.
I'll get you one. All right. Last question. You're on the hot seat here.
Okay.
We're assuming people watch this. There's people watching right now that have the symptoms, the feelings, they've been suffering in silence that we've talked about. You're talking directly to these people. What would you tell them right now? What's your advice to them as they live in the suffering right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, just the fact that there is help out there, that there are resources, as well as, like we've talked about, you're not alone. There are a lot of people who have been through this journey, and have made it on the other side, people who are still going through this journey. I think society is starting to pick up a nice groove of, hey, we all have struggles. You know, people who are well-known athletes, actors, actresses are talking about, yeah, I have depression, I have anxiety, I struggled with addiction. And so the more we move towards that, that we recognize that we're all hurting in some way, we're all dealing with something, the less that stigma gets in the way. Because
Right.
before long, it becomes the norm, right? I mean, people just get therapy, we get help, that's what we do.
Yep.
Whereas in the past, don't talk about your feelings, be tough, you know, suck it up. Those are all things that we were told as kids, whether we're male or female, you know,
Right.
or our grandparents heard or our parents. And so changing that culture is important. And that's why, you know, Grace in Your Corner is really important, and any other organization that does this type of work is it helps to make it the new norm, the new culture, that it's okay to get help. It's okay to be hurting, right? And to feel bad. That's the human condition. You know, we have struggles. But when we have those, there are things that we can turn to. And it's not just drugs and alcohol, even though
Right.
that's can be a really good temporary fix. It doesn't fix in the long run, right? It becomes a really negative thing and can derail life quite a bit. And so just knowing that there are options, yeah, I think that's the big thing. Just knowing that there's something out there. You have a bridge to walk across if you're willing to make that first step.
Yeah. Well, Cody, thank you so much. I cannot express to you enough, number one, the gratitude for how you've helped me, my family, and where I'm at now. And when we talk about essential workers, you've always been an essential worker in my book, and just what you do for people. I mean, it's such an admirable career that and profession that you're in, and we need it. You know, people need it, and you've helped so many people more than you even know. I mean, like I've referenced throughout this whole thing, there's so many things that you have said that have stuck with me that I'm now passing on to other people that are powerful. So I appreciate your time. Continue to do what you're doing. If anyone needs any information from me or would like to get in contact with Cody, I'll have my contact information below this video. You can contact that. But thank you for your time. I hope people took some things away from it. Powerful information.
You bet, man. Appreciate talking to you and for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So you take care, stay safe, and we will be in touch.
Sounds good. All right,
All
man.
right. Thanks.